You're listening to Toronto's #1 real estate podcast, powered by Watson Estates. The most successful local real estate investing starts right here, right now. Here's your host, broker, investor, and social media influencer, Bradley Watson.
Good morning, investors. Bradley here from Watson Estates. Today is Thursday, August 6th, 2020, which might seem like just a random day, but it's not. It is TRREB Stats Day. Woo! I hope you guys are excited like I am to dive deep into what happened in July here in the Toronto real estate market. I know I'm excited. And you know what they say, math is the only subject that counts. And today we're going to be getting into the different stats. Now, of course, I know you guys love the title, and there's a very specific reason I chose this title we'll get to in just a second. But what are we going to cover today? We got a good lineup, especially if you're joining us for the first time. We are #1 in iTunes, Spotify, and Google Podcasts for Toronto real estate. Make sure you slam that subscribe button. Tell your friends. I know we've got a lot of even realtors sharing on their Instagram stories, and wherever you're listening now, share it with friends because this information needs to go out, and it's not just high level. We don't want to just regurgitate the news. We want to be more detailed and actually know, as investors and myself for my investor clients, we want to know what comes next in our marketplace, and that's what we're going to cover today. So what jumps out to start us off at first glance in the July 2020 TRREB stats? In case you haven't noticed, those came out this morning. And so I looked at the news and I saw what the news was saying, and it wasn't sufficient. And then we're going to jump into, are people falling behind on their mortgage payments? We're going to talk about delinquencies and what exactly happened earlier this year. Are we screwed here in Toronto? And will more government save us from increasing real estate prices? And maybe there's a bit of division on which approach we should take. I think you guys, having listened to my podcast for a while, know my approach, but there was an article from the Financial Post that made a point that I'd like to share as we talk about government trying to step in to save us from this increasing affordability, or I guess decreasing affordability, and challenge with prices. So why the title? Why did I pick this title for the podcast today? Well, when I jump on to Toronto real estate, you could do the same just for fun. Look at what the top articles of the day are. 6 out of 9 of the ones that pop up on my feed here on Google, they say this. CP24's article reads, "No summer slowdown in Toronto real estate as July shatters sales record." Global News, they say, "No summer slowdown in Toronto real estate as July shatters sales record." City News Toronto, "No summer slowdown in Toronto real estate as July shatters sales record." Are you getting the point? Globe and Mail, they mixed it up a little. They said this, "Toronto and Vancouver real estate markets surge in July, hitting record sales for the month." Ooh. But then we go back to News 1130 and Peterborough Examiner, and they're all saying the exact same title. And you know me. I know if I'm going to stand out among the crowd, I need to name it the exact same thing. But we're going to do things a little different. We're not going to just regurgitate, because every one of those articles, need I mention, are exactly the same, pretty much word for word. And we're not doing that. We're going deep. I bypassed the intermediary, whatever you call them. I bypassed the news and I went straight to the TRREB Wire page where they actually publish the statistics. And I've gone through it with the Market Watch to share with you what jumps out right out of the gate beyond the basic headlines. And I want to know the stats, because stats are like bikinis. What they reveal is suggestive, but what they conceal is vital. So we want to know what is going on. So just to read for you, before we get into the main details of what I want to share with you what they're all saying, what those guys are saying. Here's the main headlines, okay? July was a record-breaking month for Toronto real estate sales. They say this, Toronto Regional Real Estate Board says existing home sales in the GTA jumped 29.5% compared with July 2019. Guys, 30% jump in number of sales from last year. That's a far cry difference. That's a big difference from a couple months back when we were down 60-70%. We are up, and we are staying up. Average home prices are also up 16.9%. Again, the highlights, right? So prices are up almost 17%. And they say that TRREB says low-rise homes, especially outside the downtown core, led an upward trend with overall prices jumping most in these regions: Durham, Orangeville, and South Simcoe County. The board's president says there's evidence that home market is tightening, with buyers competing as homes are being sold faster than new listings are added to the market. And then they go on to suggest it has to do with the city of Toronto entering stage 3 and the reopening. And that's it. So that is what, when you walk into work today, which I know you're not doing because you're sitting at home working, but when you walk into your Zoom meeting today, that is what everybody else knows. That's it. Okay. We're going to go deeper. We're going to talk more about what the stats are saying and what I am watching at first glance as having looking at the stats that came out this morning. You guys ready? Okay, let's do it. So starting off right off the hop, right? We got a 29.5% increase over July. That was the number of sales. So sales are up, which we just kind of talked about. And it's a new record for the month of July. And on a preliminary seasonally adjusted basis, sales were up. Listen to this number, seasonally adjusted. Okay. 49.5% compared to June 2020. Now, why is that? Why is it that we are up 50% sales compared to June? June was a good month. Well, the key word here is seasonally adjusted. And let me ask you, is July typically a better month than June for real estate sales? No, not at all. And because July this year might as well have been May of a typical year, the numbers are off the charts. So this is why I think a lot of them leave it off the table. But the main point here is we, as you're going to see as I kind of dive into this, are coming to the end, in my opinion, from seeing the stats and the trends that I'm seeing mapped out even now right in front of me. I am seeing that July is the end of the spring, quote unquote spring, or I know some of you guys don't like when I call it the spring, but that's okay, of 2020. So we got to be really paying attention now. We're rounding into August and September. Things are going to change, okay? Year over year sales growth was driven by low-rise property types, particularly in regions surrounding the GTA or Toronto, city of Toronto. Condominium apartment sales were also up on an annual basis. Very important that they mention this because a lot of people are wondering what's going on in the condo space. So condo sales are up too. New listings were also up strongly on a year-over-year basis, up 24.7%. So here's the breakdown. Okay, sales up just under 25%. New listings, we have here new listings are percentage-wise up just under 25%. So tightening, there's a slight tightening that's happening. And we have active listings down 16.3%. Sorry, let me backtrack. Sales actually were up 29.5%. So why I say there's a slight tightening is we have a very modest difference between the number of sales, meaning there's more sales happening than new listings. So things are going off the market. But this needs to be, what's important that we note here is this is across the board. These are all housing types. Now, unfortunately, the publication that came out today from TRREB didn't give specifics on each segment. And so you're going to need to stay tuned. You're going to need to slam the subscribe button because we're going to dive into that as those numbers come out. But for right now, what's important to know is at a macro perspective, we have tightening that has happened in July compared to last year. And active listings are down year over year, 16.3%. So again, very different. Last month, I think they were saying the number of the tightening, the difference was actually 30%. And keep that in mind because it's tight compared to last year, but it's not as tight as last month. And there's this trend that I'm starting to see. And that's one of them. That's one of the things that I've kind of pointed out. Now, when we look at the HPI composite benchmark price, which the big difference there is it goes based on housing type as well. It factors that in. It was up 10% compared to July. Now, that's not as high, obviously, as the 17% or the high teens. So that, but what that does tell us, so I guess actually the average price was up 16.9, the benchmark's up 10. Now there's a spread there, but I'm okay with that spread. What that tells me is that composite benchmark is really the true growth in prices. So what that says to me, first off, is we have real price growth. It's not just artificially inflated by people selling high-end homes and covering over the condo space. This is real price growth. But obviously it's not as high as the average selling price because there is a level of influence that's happening that is being overshadowed, namely the condo space. Does that make sense? So we have ourselves a good scenario. We're actually in a good spot as far as benchmark prices go. But when we compare to the average price, we will need to dive into individual segments in order to get a true picture, because unless those two numbers line up, there's going to be differences in the different housing segments. And on a preliminary seasonally adjusted basis, the average selling price was up 5.5% compared to June, and that's talking about the benchmark prices. So the point here, the main point there, is we've got real price growth, which is unlike past months, because past months we've had this big feud going on. We got the Toronto Real Estate Board. We got Better Dwelling, the supervillain. And Better Dwelling's been like, oh, no, but the benchmark prices are down, right? And the MLS is saying, or TRREB is saying, no, benchmark prices, forget benchmark prices. Average prices are up. We're good. This is just a month ago we were talking about this. But now we've taken all munitions out of the hands of Better Dwelling because we have price increase in both segments. We have ourselves a relatively sturdy market again in July, but we got to be paying attention to what comes next. But for right now, we're good. Thumbs up. Looks good across the board, generally speaking. Price growth was strongest in low-rise housing segments, right? And so let's actually do this because I want to get into some charts. I'll do algebra, I'll do trigonometry, I'll even do statistics, but graphing is where I draw the line. So let's jump into some of the stats. Let's jump into some of the numbers by housing type. And I want to point out some of the highlights right off the cuff that I noticed, okay? So let's talk about the detached. So in the 416, detached is up 25.5%. In the 905, it's up 14%. Okay, so 1 point for 416. Okay, 1 point for 416 detached, because just a month or two ago, detached homes were skyrocketing in the 905s, but not so much in the 416. Well, guess what? The 416 is back on the table. Semi-detached, 416 area, 20% increase. 905, 11.2% increase. So, guys, I'm wondering if you're starting to see this trend here. Again, the 416 outperforms in the semi-detached space. Okay, townhomes, maybe townhomes is different. Townhomes 416 is up 12.7% and 905 11.1%. Again, points go to the 416. And condos is the only exception to this rule right now because they're up only from an average price perspective 8.8% into the 416, but the 905 is up 10.6, but not even a big difference. Not even a big difference. Generally speaking, this points to me that the prices in Toronto are outperforming the GTA. And that is something that has changed. That is new. That is new information because we've seen a lot of trends. And even now, I'm going to share with you articles that have popped up talking about people moving outwards. And no, don't get me wrong. The outward communities, the far out, even beyond the 905, are doing very well. But there is definitely going to be a pullback, at least there is in my opinion, and from looking at like the trends that I've seen in the past and the information I'm hearing and just how fast people are running away, there's going to become an opportunity local that we don't want to miss. Okay, so condos were up. Let's just talk a little bit about them for a second. They were up 5% from last year in June. But now in July, in the 416, as mentioned, they're up 8.8%, and in the 905, 10.6%. Well, why is this important? Well, maybe, and I'm not talking from a season perspective, because seasonally, I think prices will keep coming down. But maybe, just maybe, looking at July, we have reached a bottom of condo prices. And I know nobody is talking about that because you've probably heard nobody say that. And I'm not saying that either. I'm just saying maybe. Maybe we have, because last month, year over year, we were comparing year over year. We were up 5%, but now we're up 8%. So now keep in mind, price increases doesn't mean prices are going to be higher next month. This is year over year. And obviously, as we round into the winter months, prices in the dollar amount will go down. But when we compare year over year, maybe we have caught that bottom point. Maybe the mass sell-off of condos has come to an end. We're going to need to be keeping our finger on this, and I want to see more statistics specific to condos, namely the months of inventory is what I'm going to be tracking. But just, you've heard it here first. Heard it here first. As far as dollar figure alone goes, the drop of prices in condos seem to have maybe reached the bottom. Now, can that change? Can that continue to go down as we roll around into things like the rental evictions happening and mortgage deferrals coming to an end and all of these things, CERB, all of these things impacting the low end market? Could that impact things further? Yes. But from what I'm looking at right here, I don't know, man. We got a little bit of a plateau happening. So July, to summarize everything, before we move on to something different, is the final spring month for us. That's what I think. Make your own investments accordingly. I believe July will be the last spring, quote unquote, spring month of 2020. August is going to be a different story, and the numbers, which we'll get to, we're going to get a little more numbers in a second, maps that out as well. So the statistics, they say that 1 in 3 people in a relationship are unfaithful. So now I just need to work out if it's my wife or my girlfriend. So when we look at what TRREB is saying, like when they're looking at everything, they're sitting back and they're saying, what kind of plan do we got here? Well, they're looking at a couple things. One is the CMHC being crazy and giving a bunch of money to researching the possibility of a capital gains tax on your primary residence and then denying that they're doing it. That's the first thing. We'll get to that one in a little bit, talking about government and whether government should be sticking their nose in your private business. But then TRREB, they're recommending, and this comes, there's a few things that they've got here that I think are pretty good. I'm pretty critical of TRREB when there needs to be a light shine on TRREB. I have no problem shining a light on TRREB. But right now, I actually don't mind what they're saying here. Listen to some of the things they suggested. TRREB's policy recommendations related to economic recovery and housing supply are outlined in a detailed policy brief that was recently submitted to local, provincial, and federal governments, with a key message to use caution in implementing demand-side real estate market stimulus, which could contribute to housing price inflation. Good. Thumbs up. I agree. With regard to housing supply, which is key to improving housing affordability, TRREB's key recommendation is for all governments to expedite the creation of, quote, a missing middle housing. Good. I agree. In this regard, TRREB applauds Toronto City Council's approval to create more missing middle houses in the, quote, yellow belt, which we've talked about in past podcasts. Hopefully you didn't miss it. Go back. I don't have that podcast in front of me, but we've talked about that in the past. But what it's referring to is these areas where they're zoned specifically for detached homes and allowing more development of these missing middle homes. So not a green belt, a yellow belt, which is within the city walls in these areas that are zoned. The zoning needs to change in order to allow for this infrastructure to develop transit-oriented mixed-use communities. Okay, so that's what TRREB says. Those are recommendations, and I am on board for all of those things. It's these underlying points that are made that throw me right off, like the one we talked about just yesterday, where we had the CEO of the Ontario Real Estate Association mentioning this idea of a tax holiday on your transfer tax. So you don't need to pay it up front. And my argument is that's a buyer-driven thing. And thank you, Sleepy in Toronto. He was one, or he or she was the only one. Yeah, I woke up from their slumber to share with us their thoughts on it. And I actually agree with these points. So they said this. Let me explain the point about the land transfer tax holiday. I know that if I move, it will cost me at least $100,000 in fees, whatever that number is in fees. That is why I'm hesitant of moving. If they reduce the land transfer tax, then switching cost is less and I'm able and more likely to sell. This will increase supply, especially in lower tier homes as people move up. That really, it's a good point, and it's something I've thought of. But the only thing here is the problem there is it only matters in helping supply of properties if they were to become a renter, because now you've opened up more supply. If they're just moving house to house, you haven't really increased supply. In fact, you're actually in that move as well. The first scenario, you're tightening the rental market, which indirectly is still housing. So we actually still have a tightness here. So just switching people over, making it more affordable, and not just it's not really more affordable. It's just deferred. You're paying it later. But what we're doing is we're incentivizing these people to move. All we're doing is moving everyone around, which is great for us realtors. It just packs our pockets with more cash as people are, yes, they're saving on the fees of land transfer tax, but they're still paying real estate. And here I'm a real estate agent saying, I don't think it's going to work. Hey, I'm on board, man. You want to do it? You want to move more people's housing? I'm okay with that. You're going to increase sales artificially, but are you really helping the supply? No, you're not. You're not. And so I'm still going to stand by that. I'm open to hearing more thoughts on if there are other ideas to open up supply. I think the biggest thing right now is streamlining zoning. And we're going to talk about how government can get their butt out of the way shortly. Okay. All right. There's this question right now of immigration that I just want to briefly touch on before we move on to our next point here is, will people come back to Canada? And this came out of a comment that came from Neil McDonough on YouTube. Thank you. And I love this comment. And this is where you guys are the best. You guys rock because you're able to contribute in ways that I would not have ever had access to. Listen to this. I am a Canadian non-resident working in the Middle East. I work in English language testing, which brings me in contact with thousands of would-be migrants. Have no mistake, there is a world tsunami of people who view Canada as the promised land. As soon as you open your borders, condos will fill up, guaranteed. Let this give some encouragement to some of you who are maybe sitting on condos and couldn't sell them and are concerned. Let this be optimism for people that are holding cash dollars, whether you own real estate or not, to invest and are waiting for your opportunity to jump in. I agree. There is a tsunami of people. The past stats have showed that Canada is a wonderful place. And for anyone who says it's not, go away. Leave it in the comments and move along. Don't give a thumbs down. Just go to the next guy. Toronto is awesome. And there's an article came out of Business Insider that encourages that too. Toronto is emerging as a tech superpower as immigrants choose Canada over the US. If you think someone wants to go to the States over Canada, I think you're mistaken, but I mean, that's your call. Go ahead. Be my guest. I'm sure they'll welcome you with open arms. So are people, I want to get into our next topic here, are people falling behind on their mortgage payments? And of course, our best friend, Better Dwelling, is going to share with us the counterpoint, a concern that exists from Q1 of 2020. I love to lean on Better Dwelling. They're very good at ruining my chi. And you know what they say, statistically speaking, 6 out of 7 dwarves are not happy. So let's hear the bad news. The article reads, Toronto and Vancouver real estate delinquencies rise while the rest of Canada falls. So they go on to this big explanation on how delinquencies work and how it's more important that we look year over year because we don't want to deal with seasonality, yada, yada, yada. But the main point they say is the mortgage delinquency rate is a percent of mortgages overdue. Today's Equifax number are mortgages that are more than 90 days overdue. So you're 3 months behind in your mortgage payments, which I mean means get them out of here, right? Which is pretty straightforward, but there's 2 things to keep in mind. They say seasonality and level. Not going to dive into that. They're just positioning themselves in order to say, even though we've had a quarter not so bad, yearly we're bad and therefore it's terrible. That's fine. I'm okay with that. You can have that point. So Canadian mortgage delinquencies fall. There's just one big difference in all of this is we're talking about a very significant change in 2020 compared to 2019. But that's all right. Canadian mortgage delinquencies were falling across the country in the first quarter. The rate of mortgage delinquencies fell to 0.29% in Q1. This is across Canada, unchanged from the previous quarter. So generally flat. And compared to the same quarter last year, this was 3.3% lower. So they have lower delinquencies across the country. But Toronto, we are screwed because we suck. Toronto mortgage delinquencies are rising from all-time lows a few years ago. The rate reached 0.11% in Q1 compared to the same quarter last year, which was it's 10% higher delinquencies. 10%. That's pretty big. That's pretty significant considering the cost of the mortgages in Toronto are a little bit higher than, I don't know, anywhere else. Saskatchewan? This was the biggest Q1 for mortgage delinquencies since 2017. A key difference between then and now is it was falling back then and it's rising now. So we don't have people declaring bankruptcies, but we do have delinquencies. Interesting. Mortgage deferrals are coming due, which is why this is great timing for this article, even though it was Q1. Although most hold it as a concern. I'm not as worried about it personally. And the reason is because as many people aren't talking about, or many people don't know, they're in talks right now with lenders. Like the CMHC is trying to figure out a plan for mortgage deferrals. Do we allow them to continue or do we stop them? Which everyone's under the assumption, tell me that they're not, that they're going to end. They're going to end abruptly in the next month or two. But there's right now talks, and it is almost unanimous from a lot of these lenders, from the ones that I've read or heard about, that they want an extension. Most of them want an extension, so I anticipate you will get an extension. At some point, the party needs to end, but it's not going to end in the next month or two. I think you've got other problems to deal with, namely CERB and rental evictions. But of course, the mortgage deferral still looms, and if delinquencies are high, we need to be keeping our head down a little bit. So the message is out and loud and clear. There's yet again another article. It says, this is from Globe and Mail. It's a 180-degree turn. Toronto realtors see signs of a pandemic exodus. Guys, if you're missing out on it, there was a while ago, we were talking about people leaving the city. A year ago, we'd be talking about this on a monthly basis. Now we're talking about it daily. People are running. They are leaving. They're trying to cross. What's a lake between here and... I don't even know. There's no lake. There's no lakes between here and everywhere people are going. I guess you can cross Lake Ontario if you were going to like Niagara or something. They're parting the Great Lake of Ontario to run to somewhere less expensive. Meanwhile, we've got this big fight going on right now between the tenants and the landlords, and it is heating up. Oh, it's heating up. Keep Your Rent Toronto. They shared an article on Twitter. I think it's really funny. San Francisco judge upholds city ban on evictions during coronavirus. And then they shoot John Tory right in the face. John Tory, he's on your team. He is on your team. No. They've got him with a clasp right now. He has a decision to make. This is what they say. He can join North American cities taking action to protect tenants from the eviction by using his emergency powers, or he can allow homelessness and misery to grow. Oh, that damn John Tory. I feel so bad for him. You shouldn't, dude. You lined yourself up. You're in bed with a monster here on Keep Your Rent Toronto. They are not going to be your friend. They are not going to be your friend. And he's trying. He's legitimately trying. But this is a provincial decision. And so then they point there's a city that in the United States, which I'm sure has different ways of doing things, and then saying, well, we need to be doing it too. Oh my gosh. So some landlords are getting a little fed up, and they're pushing back, which is also so comedic. I love it. Landlords have no rights. Peterborough landlord calls out tenant on a billboard. We don't have rights, but we got billboards. We got businesses we can put signs up. A Peterborough landlord has put up a large sign on her apartment building asking the provincial government to help with tenants that refuse to pay rent. The sign names the tenant and claims he owns 13 months rent totaling $16,250. So imagine you're going home and it's like you got your name plastered with how much money you owe. It reminds me of the Blue Jays when they were getting called out for not paying rent, but so funny. And I mean, it's like school kids right now. These like this little boxing match, a tit for tat. But realistically, Doug Ford's just sitting over there, just thinking, "Oh, okay, we're gonna just let's start off the tenant landlord tenant board here and see. Let's get things going here. Bill 184 is live and well." But I did see an interesting article that came out of Saskatchewan. Speaking of Saskatchewan, and they're talking about shelters. Very good point. I'm not going to get into the details because really there wasn't a lot of details, but I love the point nonetheless from the heading. Landlords and shelters expected to feel impact after eviction ban lifted. Very important that we note this, guys. If we're going to be evicting people on a mass scale, then prepare for a mass amount of people entering shelters. It makes sense. People aren't really talking about housing in that way, but we need to be paying attention to that, and we already have an issue on that, so let's just compound it. Why not? So who is compounding that issue? Who's the bad guy? Who is them, right? Those guys. They're saying they do this. Who is them? Who is the bad guy? Well, according to an article from the Financial Post, it's called "Government is Why Housing in Canada is Unaffordable and More Taxes Won't Help." It's an opinion piece. So don't shoot the messenger and don't shoot the messenger's message that comes from this news outlet. I love how they say that. It's an opinion piece. It's not a representation of the news article that published it. Of course it is, but it's not. And so they talk about CMHC, right? They're giving this $250,000 to Generation Squeeze, an advocacy organization for young Canadians, and they're researching ways to improve housing affordability. How can we make housing better? And it'll focus on, they say, quote, a wealth generated by rising home values, which incited fear. It's got a lot of people freaking out that they're going to come and they're going to tax your primary residence, even though they say they're not. They're saying it won't. This whole idea of taxing people, taxing, but not just taxing, government intervention, government spending, pumping the system, buying these mortgage-backed bonds, right? But more taxes won't increase affordability. If the government really wants to know why housing is unaffordable, it could have saved its $250,000 and looked in the damn mirror. I added the word damn there. It's true. Government at all levels drive up the cost of housing in two ways. One, by restricting the housing supply. And then two, by increasing housing costs through taxes and fees. These barriers to entry that we're saying we need to defer these taxes, this is why that argument is there's a legitimacy to it. Because these fees are prohibiting people from doing what they want to do. They're feeling stuck. And it's all because of taxes and fees, which are meant to help us and to generate profit to build your city. It's a great thing. No, it's not. No, it's not. The spin-off money that comes from real estate transactions is huge. And we've even seen that in articles as well. The CMHC defines housing as affordable when, quote, it costs less than 30% of a household's before tax income, which includes rent or mortgage payments, property taxes, and other home bills. In Canada's big city, the average mortgage payment represents 44%. In Toronto, it's 57%. And in Vancouver, 69%. I don't know what they're doing over there. It's like, I love how there's always one worse is you just like, oh, you just kind of slip under the radar. But 57% is super high, right? Here in Toronto. The price of housing increases when demand from population growth outpaces supply, which is absolutely the case here in Toronto. We are the fastest growing metropolitan area in North America in 2019, and we grew by 127,500 people in 1 year, even though only 102,000 homes were added in the last 3 years. Absurd. Because in 3 years, they end up buying something. We are stuck, and it's no wonder months of inventory are going down in most housing segments right now. Instead of addressing their own regulation that suffocates supply, government have instead focused on the red herring policies to suppress demand, such as targeting foreign buyers. What's that all about? The non-resident speculation tax, it had a meager 156 payments in Toronto in the first quarter of 2019. Nobody's paying that. Why is nobody paying that? Because nobody's buying here anymore. I mean, it kind of slowed down non-resident purchases, but is that what's driving things up? No, maybe it's the tax you're using to try and protect us. This in a city that expects a growth of 41,000 people per year. 156 of them paid something for the non-resident tax. Guys, people are moving here. Legitimate people are moving here. And the issue is supply. We're using demand tools to fight supply issues, as Benjamin Tal, the chief economist of CIBC, says. Government should increase supply by acting promptly and reasonably on zoning matters. And if you want to go all political, that's fine too. In Ontario, rezoning can take up to 7 years, and there's currently a lengthy backlog, including 100,000 units held up in Toronto alone. That's why it's a miracle we're actually seeing a lot of pre-construction's coming online. It's actually great news. The former premier, Kathleen Wynne, who is a real winner, added to the problem. I added that in. I don't want to like get people mad at the article. Be mad at me. Be mad at me. I will carry this for the team, right? They dismantled the OMB, the Ontario Municipal Board, that expedited decision-making, and now Doug Ford, where he needs credit, whatever your thoughts on Doug Ford is, he has sped up through Ontario's Housing Supply Act plan. He sped up the process to increase density around transit hubs. And you've probably heard about some of those developments happening. Even when everyone was hiding because of COVID, they were saying we need development. And we do. But I am not sure where the government's getting their stats to make some of these policies. You know what they say? Old mathematicians, they never die. They just go off on a tangent, and absolutely the stats that are coming out of the government are off a tangent. We need to be careful, because did you know that 12.5% of all statistics, 12.5% are made up on the spot? Did you know that? So you need to run the stats for yourself, and that is what we are doing here on Toronto's #1 real estate podcast. And hopefully you're getting value. If you are, give us a thumbs up, give us a subscribe, tell your friends, tell your grandma, socially distance with a mask. But buy where you want to live and invest where the money makes sense. Hopefully the government stops sticking their nose in and making the money not make sense here in Toronto. I'll see you guys next time. Take care and keep it real.